Good evening. By and large, for an ideology to take root among a people or a nation, it is necessary to transform the individual into, we can call it, the mass man. Because masses are, actually were before in time and now on the internet, they are what crowds are in space. That is to say, a large quantity of people unable to express their human qualities because members of masses are not connected to each other, either as individuals or as parts of a community. In fact, they are only linked with each other through some impersonal, abstract, crystallizing, and often dehumanizing factor. With crowds, it could be, for example, a sports match, a huge sale, or a morbid murder. With masses, it is the drumming repetition of the same thing, but the same media. Media, in turn, today, overwhelmingly funded and overwhelmingly owned by historically old and yet modernized, clever masters of the human mind and apostles of the thought unique, what is called the thought unique. In essence, we can agree that masses are those who love they know not why and hate upon no better ground, ever ready to accept the master's line, even when the verity of it is in strong suspicion, to quote Shakespeare. That said, thanks to the imposed and before mentioned thought unique, he who does not agree with the US-funded Ukrainian coup d'etat of 2014 or with the 8-year bombardment of the Donbass, with the open and openly Nazi's nature of the current regime and army, with the banning of the Russian language, with the essential shutting down of the Ukrainian church and the imprisonment of some of its pastors and so forth, this individual is variously defined as a Putin's stooge and nostalgically, at least in France, as a collaborator, more familiarly shrunk into a collabo. Collabo is a term coined to dishonor those Frenchmen who had acquiesced to live acquiescently within the Vichy regime of Marshal Pétain during World War II. After France's crushing defeat of 1940, Pétain had come to terms with Hitler, and the ensuing regime got its name from its capital, Vichy, a lovely town in the very lovely French region of Auvergne. And it should be added, though easily forgotten, that Marshal Pétain had been a hero of World War I, acclaimed as a national hero for having stopped the Germans at Verdun and having assumed command of the French forces in 1917, which is why he was exiled but not killed after World War II. But returning to Ukraine, in the whole business, as most know, there are some metaphorical elephants in the metaphorical living room, even if by convention those elephants are assumed to be invisible. Because in much of the Western world, whoever questions, however mildly and with supporting evidence, questions the narrative of an event actually formally named in New York in 1972, over 30 years after its actual occurrence, this person, thanks to the democratic Western values, including freedom of expression, can easily end up ostracized or occasionally even in jail. Those condemned for this reason have been many. Emblematic is Miss Ursula Haverbeck, who, having in no way been a Hitler supporter or apologist, only questioned some of the questionable assertions related to the never-ending campaign launched, as mentioned, in 1972. For this, she was jailed in Germany when she was actually 93 years young or old, depending on your point of view. The whole thing is equally extraordinary and relevant to the issue dealt with here, considering that in Ukraine all know and witness a systematic reinterpretation of history, an inversion of values, a revolution in words, and the reversal of meanings. The American mastermind of the so-called Maidan Revolution, the two ensuing Ukrainian presidents, and some of the ministers are all chosen people, while the most active and notorious personalities of the Ukrainian army, setting aside the mercenaries, are incontrovertibly Nazis. Even the main avenue in Kiev has been renamed Bandera Avenue in honor of Hitler's collaborator and most popular partner of the Germans in Ukraine during World War II. The sponsor of the current Ukrainian president is equally chosen people material whose fiber and temper would not recommend themselves even to the most forgiving evaluator. Equally notable are the multi-billion-dollar donations of arms to Ukraine by Joseph Biden and even Mr. Bankman-Fried, notorious hero of the recent close to $1 billion ruinous Ponzi scheme. Even he has allegedly contributed $60 million to the regime, while he has equally been hailed as a great co-religionist, great friend, and great supporter of the current Ukrainian president. But let's now return to the issue of who is or isn't a collaborator or collabo, and if so, of whom. Let's begin with the lexicon. Collaboration is a word of easy etymological determination. It derives from Latin, meaning to work together. And historically, collaboration referred to the medieval meaning of shared possessions acquired through work by a married couple. However, in France, during the German occupation in World War II, as I mentioned, it assumed the significance of cooperating with the enemy, and as if to ensure that the new World War II meaning could not be easily confused with the original, the term collaborator was shrunk into the shorter and disparaging sounding word collabo. This lexical metamorphosis began on October 24, 1940, when, in the little town of Montoire, a meeting was held at the railway station between Adolf Hitler and Marshal Pétain, President of France. And the historical photo shows Pétain shaking Hitler's hand. A transcription of the actual conversation is not available, but 6 days later, Pétain, in a radio speech delivered while sitting by his fireplace, gave the French a status report on the situation. And it is during this broadcast that he used the term collaboration in a significantly historical paragraph. It is a matter of honor in order to maintain French unity, a unity spanning 10 centuries, and in the context of a constructive new European order, that today I have begun a path of collaboration with Germany. One important other consideration. As a matter of principle and action, collaboration was an integral foundation of Pétain's philosophy in relation, we could say, to the new European order spoken of in his radio address. Meaningfully, Pétain's words "new European order" are omitted from French history books text in schools referring to that period and to that event. Why so, one may ask? Because in the sanctioned interpretation of history, it is important to emphasize Pétain's submission to Germany, that is, rather than collaboration, which objectively, at least in my view, should have been called modus vivendi or vivendi, a sentence whose flavor of neutrality and antiquity, we could say, would better represent the condition when people who declared a war on an enemy and lost attempt to survive in objectively critical circumstances. Still, Given the aftermath of World War II and the strongly promoted implementation of the European Union, Petain's new European order returned a few years later under a new flag and, we may add, returned with a vengeance. Ever since, implicitly, explicitly, officially and unofficially, the new European order has been imposed, not to say forced upon, the seemingly complacent, compliant, beguiled, gullible, undisturbed and unruffled Europeans. Furthermore, given that the tale of history cannot be told without often strategic and convenient omissions, a curious reader may be interested in another a remarkably curious piece of news, usually and strategically omitted. One important protagonist in the establishment of the current European Union was Mr. Walter Holstein, a jurist most close to Hitler during the regime. Holstein had accompanied Hitler in his state visit to Mussolini in Italy and had established the legal framework for the notorious Axe, Hitler-Mussolini, or Axis. Later, he set up the legal framework for the new European order, now renamed European Union, including the structure of what will become the Treaty of Rome of 1957. Equally, this Mr. Walter Holstein became the first president of the CEE Commission, Economic Commission for Europe. In other words, he was a pedigreed Nazi, though he successfully managed to hide the fact. So much so that I would wager that most of my viewers don't know about it. While assigning no value judgment to this historical truth, there is a connecting point or common denominator between Petain's collaboration in the context of a new European order, as I mentioned, and the collaboration in the context of Walter Holstein's even newer European order. In both cases, that connection or context or common denominator is represented by a one word: submission. It is because France was invaded that Pétain did collaborate. And apart from any related value judgment, who declared war on whom in World War II? It may be historically uncomfortable, yet it was not Hitler but France who declared war on Germany, and so did England on the 3rd of September of 1939, 1 month and a half before the mentioned interview at the railway station of Monterre. Any historical consideration, you may agree, fails in the objective of clarification if it is not extracted from the web of intertwining events and, at least temporarily, considered as an independent fact. And I'm referring here to Hitler's Lebensraum, which means live in space in German, which is a German rendering of American President James Polk's, in the 19th century, his notion of America's manifest destiny. And I will deal with this a little bit later. And why did France and England declare war on Germany? Because from the middle of the 1930s, Germany had risen in power, as we know, aiming at agglomerating German-speaking countries so as to redress the unfortunate and objectively despicable decisions taken at the end of World War I. When the map of Europe was redrawn, creating new countries that contained a conspicuous proportion of Germans in speech and culture, notably Austria, created after the dismemberment of the millenarian Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Sudeten, the western part of the new Republic of Czechoslovakia. A German survivor from the Sudeten emigrated from Germany to Portland after World War II. I remember that he used to recount harrowing episodes of mistreatment of the Germans by the Czechs after the Czechs took over the Sudeten. Treating people as pawns and tokens is usually unadvisable. Even in our historical yesterday, the Czechs and the Slovaks found that they were not the same or same enough to be part of the same state, and they split, as we know. After Germany united with Austria in 1938, the Western powers became worried. They grumbled, but accepted the fait accompli at the famous Munich Conference, and henceforth the West split among those in favor and those against the Munich Agreement. Missing in the German reunification was the Danzig Corridor, earlier given to Poland, and this practically split Prussia, which was the historical heart of modern Germany, split it from Germany proper. On paper, Danzig was the item of contention, apart from other German strategies, planned or pending. Poland refused to yield, and Germany attacked Poland. Now, England and France declared war on Germany. It is currently fashionable in certain quarters to equate Putin with Hitler, but the comparison is not tenable, at least in my view, and in view of many. Russia does not harbor designs to invade other countries. The opposite is true. A map of Russia produced after the end of the USSR by the US think tank features European Russia split into 4 independent states under US protection. I wasn't able to find that map, but I remember it. While Russian Asia is up for grabs because it's too big according to that poor imitation of a woman called Victoria Nuland or Nudelman, who, Shakespeareanly speaking, is not worth the dust that the rude wind blows in her face, at least in my opinion. In fact, after 1991 and the tumultuous dissolution of the USSR, in purely technical and historical terms, NATO had assumed Hitler's role, the role of Hitler. That is, the US has not ceased to erode and nibble at the geographic and strategic space protecting Russia, which was accomplished, as we know, by incorporating the eastern state into NATO, also using the only slightly more chaste instrument of the European Union. And the whole conducted in platitudinous breach of the agreement and justified by the ridiculous claim that nothing in writing existed as a reference on the agreement. Therefore, watching the world from Russia's point of view, it is easy to see that all that Russia won in Europe after her enormous sacrifices during World War II had been essentially eliminated. Historically, the situation is the mirror image of Europe in 1938-39 as seen by England and France then, wherefrom it follows that today's Ukraine is yesterday's Poland. Besides, Ukraine is an integral part of Russia, of her people and history since 1554 and the Treaty of Pereyaslav, of which I spoke in another video. Therefore, removing Ukraine from Russia almost equates to removing Paris from France, Tuscany from Italy, or Athens from Greece. And from Moscow's point of view, the situation is dangerous. Recent events show that the US destroyed Iraq and Libya, nor has given up on Syria, all on behalf of an artificial apartheid states that cannot be named. For they, Iraq, Libya and Syria, were the only countries upholding the rights of the Palestinians, along with Iran. And after the US-funded South American-style Maidan revolution in 2014, the threat against Russia became obvious and the damage direct, quite apart from the curious and extraordinary alliance of the resurrected Ukrainian Nazis with the new Ukrainian government, made up by members of the chosen people. Now, returning to historical analogies, Russia's action equate to what England and France did in 1939. And who would today dare to hold that England and France were wrong in declaring war on Hitler? Yet, at the time, the perception was quite different, starting with Pétain and his collaborationists. Before the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943, many in France held that Germany had not attacked France or England, and therefore why France declared war on Germany. In summary, those who compare Putin with Hitler should remember that it is exactly what England and France did to Germany, with a significant difference. England and France declared war on Germany to defend the Poles, and Russia instead launched her military operation to defend the Russians. Quite apart from the remarkable admixture of a Nazi-inspired army and the post-Maidan type of government. Besides, to be a collaborator implies agreeing, conniving and cooperating with an enemy present in the territory. But Russia does not impose her rule, or France on England, or anywhere else for the matter. Therefore, those who accuse of collaborationism, the dissenters on the American NATO line on Russia, are either not serious or more likely in bad faith. How can one be a collaborator with a country that does not occupy or plan to occupy the country of the collaborators? Instead, dominating England, France and Europe, at large at least, is the exceptional nation. And to quote verbatim from a Biden's statement made on November 24, 1920, America is back and ready to lead the world, where being back meant a sharp break with the America First inspired foreign policy of Donald Trump. Militarily speaking, it is difficult to argue that Europe is not under US occupation. De Gaulle himself detected and denounced the overpowering, constraining and conditioning presence of the US in France, which led him to exit NATO and to impose the closing of the US bases in France in 1966. Later, President Mitterrand, French President Mitterrand, echoed the same sentiments and policies, whereas the current French President Macron appears to be a reservist of the exceptional nation. Therefore, the label of Putin's collaborator assigned to dissenters, at least in opinion, is absurd. For the real collaborator is he who is hand in glove with those who dominate and impose their geopolitical choices on Europe at large. Besides, nowhere in Russian history or Russian archives or known archives will be found a document declaring or theorizing that Russia should conquer Europe or, for the matter, the world. Hence, it cannot be argued that if Putin takes Ukraine, he will then conquer Poland, Germany, France, and so forth. Such theory, if it existed, would have manifested itself since long, and comparing the Russian Federation with the Soviet regime is absurd. The USSR was the embodiment of Marxist theories applied to world revolution. Nor it is anti-Semitic to remember that members of the chosen people made up 95% of the first Politburo. Besides, on the 200th anniversary of Karl Marx's birth, which happened in April 30, 2018, the New York Times, the official opinion of America, whose ownership ever since 1895 is politely left unsaid and yet unbroken and undisputed, the New York Times published a conspicuous article titled "Happy Birthday, Karl Marx, You Were Right," which requires no comment. But returning to the main point, Russia under Putin has attempted to re-establish the security that the nation had before its dissolution. In Asia, all that Russia wants is that the ex-USSR countries do not become a threat. There was a hint of another Maidan 2 years ago in Kazakhstan, fortunately dispelled in time. Most of us agree that the sovereignty of a country does not imply the right of being a threat to her neighbors. Besides, there is no extant text, present or past, theorizing or suggesting that Russia should dominate the universe, or at least entire continents and countries at large, something actually equivalent to Mr. Kagan, worthy husband of Victoria Nuland, his plan for a new American century. Another relevant historical date is December 2, 1845, when the 10th President of the United States, James Polk, pronounced a speech containing the words "manifest destiny," referring to a quasi-supernatural license granted to the United States for dominating all lands from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Henceforth, the U.S. would fight Mexico in the south and antagonize Britain in the north to secure full spectrum dominance in those lands because the gods had said so. In the end, President Polk managed to secure the largest territorial expansion and extension of the United States ever. Yet that manifest destiny never died and still informs and inspires current U.S. international policy, as we all can see. Terms other than manifest destiny may apply: indispensable nation, acceptable nation, and so forth. But they are, we could say, cosmetic variations on the theme. For, let me say it, in our current society of the spectacle, trifle is king rather than meaning, and the trifles always require an exuberance of ornament as provided by commercial media. For, or because, as Dr. Johnson used to say, the building which has no strength can be valued only for the showiness of its decorations. The pebble must be masked with care which hopes to be valued as a diamond, and words can be cleverly labored when they are intended to numb the mind and to replace nothingness. Besides, expecting a change of mind or heart from current Western politicians would be naive. Theirs is a life of little work and much luxury, and when a position teems with such pleasant consequences, who can without regret confess it to be false? Furthermore, in the current U.S. political landscape, arrogance seems to be recommended as the supply of every defect and the ornament of every supposed excellence. Alternatively, those who are unable to add anything to truth hope for eminence from the heresies of paradox, as in the case of the Putin collaborators. Thank you for watching, see you next time, and as always, may all the number of the stars give light to your fair way. Good night.